Okay, my name is Rob Cummings. I am the former CTO at Falfurrias Capital. We were or have been a longtime user of DealCloud's deal management platform for 10 years plus. And I was the primary user slash administrator slash individual that implemented new features at the firm. Well, I was always inquisitive about what the best practices were in our industry and how to manipulate or to configure the software to take advantage of best practices. And those were ever evolving best practices. So it could be, how to manage deal flow, how to manage fundraising, how to manage our people. These are some of the, primary workflows, so to say, that exist in our industry. But I wanted to make sure that I was utilizing the software to the best way to enable those workflows. And the best way to do that with our customer success managers, to have conversations, to understand how peer firms are using the software, and then how we at Falfurrias Capital could take advantage of those. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the software company DealCloud is always coming out with new features and functions, and we wanted to understand the best way to take advantage of those features and functions within our software. Well, I think there was two things. There was always the quarterly updates that came out as far as feature and function, and understanding what new features and functions were available. But where client success bridged the gap is to talk about, okay, here's this new feature that's in the software. Here is how it's been implemented at other firms, and how it's been taken advantage of. So that's a conversation to be had that really came on the heels of the feature and function being released. But then the other thing is that our annual renewal would come up every July 1st. So we always engaged in a conversation, let's say 60 days prior to renewal, just about usage of the system, best practices, how we're using the system. And my goal in those conversations, again, were to hear from our client success rep as to what we could take advantage of, what some of the best practices were from our peer group that is using the same platform. Not until this past 6 months, they began using Foresight. So the way the process changed from years prior to just kind of our random, Zoom meeting, it turned into I was sent the Foresight software to kind of go through all of our key workflows. And there were two parts to the Foresight software. One was, how effectively are we using that workflow, or how effective is the software at enabling that workflow? And then the second piece is how important was that to our firm? And so kind of looking at those two things combined, to understand really what bubbles to the top as to the most important feature to utilize for our firm. Well, after going through the assessment process, the value assessment process with Foresight, that information was compiled in the software, and a value assessment report was returned to me that went through, I would probably say, there's 8 key workflows within our system, and these are significant workflows. And it kind of gave us a readout of all of those key workflows, what's working well, what isn't working well. But then that spawned a conversation with the client service rep to say, hey, if you were utilizing this workflow in this manner, which is a best practice, let's say, across private equity firms, you may have these better results. So I would say the Foresight assessment was the input to have a deeper dive conversation with our client success rep about what features, functions, workflows could be enhanced to better enable our firm. Well, the biggest thing it enabled is a conversation about I'll call it our fundraising module. It had been implemented pretty generic, and what we quickly learned is there were there was a better way to implement fundraising that was kind of a best practice across private equity firms. So without getting into too much detail, the ability to do multiple fundraisers concurrently, the ability to push a button and enable a investor list for the next fundraise, the ability to track multiple closes. Those are all some of the workflows that were not enabled in our fundraising module that was uncovered with the Foresight analysis and the conversation with our client success rep. And then that conversation pivoted to, okay, what would we need to do to enable our version of the DealCloud software to take advantage or to enable these features and functions to make our entire fundraising process more valuable to our firm. So we went through, that was a couple of conversations, and then we decided to actually go forward with a enhancement project to enable some of the key workflows that I just mentioned. And that took place over 30, 45 days. But the result was a much more feature robust fundraising workflow functionality within our system that we could take advantage of. As we're a growing firm, we are now doing multiple fundraisers at the same time, and this information is invaluable to us. Always had a strong relationship with our account manager and client success manager, but what it brought in others from the organization that were true experts. Again, using this fundraising, one of the guys that is on the enhancement team was then able to join a conversation, going to really a deep dive detail as to what we could take advantage of, how we could implement some new features within fundraising to take advantage of that within DealCloud. So I would say it opened up the doors to have broader conversations with our software vendor to really learn how to best use our software. I think without a tool like Foresight, the conversation might be a bit awkward to have with your customer. If you think of Foresight as an enabler to have that conversation, so in other words, you're able to gather empirical data into a software tool and then take a look at that data, which then fuels the conversation that you can have with your client. And so I think that's the biggest value. Otherwise, you're kind of going into a conversation blind, whereas now you have a software tool that has collected all of this information, that has detailed information, and you can reference during that, whether it's an upsell or an enhancement conversation or just a renewal conversation that you may be having with your client. What I think is interesting is that the value assessment report that's provided by Foresight, that is a deliverable that I now have, and then I can refer back to. So while we went through the fundraising enhancement that we talked about, the other key area that we talked about for our firm was a staffing best practice that's enabled through our DealCloud software. We did not bite that off for this round, but the thing is that I have that analysis, and it's something that I would like the firm to do in the future because I see the power from it. It was one of those things as we just didn't want to bite off more than we could chew. But now we have almost a roadmap, so to say, from Foresight on some of the items that we could take advantage of in the future. But the other great thing is that we'll go through this whole process again at renewal time. There'll be a bunch of new feature and functionality that the software vendor has released, and hopefully we can have a conversation about taking advantage of some of that new feature and functionality. And that should be exposed by doing another Foresight account review or value assessment.